Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 332 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory, and joining me today is Richard Miller, counsellor, supervisor and AI ethicist. A graduate of Glasgow Caledonian University, Richard has a diverse background in student leadership and therapeutic practice. He previously served as president of Aberdeen University Students' Association and is now an executive officer for the National Union of Students in Scotland. Additionally, he is also a co-director of the Scottish Institute of Emotion Focus Therapy. Richard is also gaining a growing reputation as an AI ethicist, delivering insightful lectures on the ethical use of AI in therapy to an expanding audience. Today, he joins us to explore the evolving discussion around AI in therapy, its possibilities, challenges, and ethical considerations. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 332 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Both Rory Oakes and myself, Ken Kelly, are delighted to welcome you to our three topics today. Starting off, ethical sustainable practice. We're going to be speaking about adopting an online mindset. We then go into practice matters. Rory's already introduced Richard Miller, who's going to be speaking about ethical use of AI in therapy. That's a must listen. And then, of course, we go into student services, where we recognize you on your formal journey to become a counselor or a psychotherapist. And today we're going to be speaking about comparing ethical frameworks. Why do we do it? But let's start off, Rory, with developing an online mindset. What exactly do we mean by an online mindset?
Well, I think that's a very good question, Ken. And I think an online mindset is a vision of your practice that includes working online and face-to-face. And more importantly, it means that you see that online work is of equal value as your face-to-face work is. And thinking about what you need to do to prepare to work online effectively. And just a little bit of history here. Before 2020, working online, be it via a video link or telephone, or by text or by email, was a bit of a niche activity. And then all of a sudden, we saw the world change, the pandemic of 2020. And what happened was therapists were forced to go online, and so were clients. But the legacy of that is that now online work is considered a normal way of working. And a lot of therapists work in a mixed economy. They may do face-to-face work, they may do online working. So, if you're developing an online practice, you need to be familiar with the software you're using. There's lots of video software out there. I won't name the software, but I think we all know the platforms that we use. Some people use platforms that are within very secure environments where they also store their notes. But it's understanding how it works, how your webcam works, how your microphone works. Do you have fast enough internet? Does your computer support online working? I met a lot of people during the pandemic who are using very, very old computers. I mean, incredibly old computers that really weren't made for video work. So it's about having as much a technological mindset as it is about a positive mindset of working online. It's about engaging with the technicalities of the technology to make therapy a really great experience for clients.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it, that when we speak about working online, we start with this very topic, and we do a training course of it's a certificate in online working ethically, and this is the very first topic we cover because it precedes anything else. It's thinking about your practice and all of its elements in a completely different way. And I'm going to go back to my formal training, just as an example of this. And in my formal training, one of the exercises that we did that everybody loved, and we must have spent 40 minutes on this and another 20 minutes reporting back what we'd learned from it. It was designing our perfect counselling room. What was the room going to look like? And I remember thinking about what kind of a carpet it was going to have so that it would absorb the sound, and that the door was going to be soundproof so that nobody could hear, and that the curtains were going to be closed so that nobody could see in if they were walking past the room or the office, and where the clock was going to be positioned so that the client could see it because it was respectful to the client, where the chairs were going to be put. And I remember probably debating for at least 5 minutes about where the tissue box was going to go.
Oh, yes.
With the group, with all the peers. So much time and effort is put into imagining what this practice looks like and learning about the ethics that surround that and how to hold a client so that they feel welcome, that they feel they're in a professional setting, and they feel that it is confidential and that they're being held. And I wonder how much of that same mindset is put into online. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm sure it is. And if you're an ethical practitioner and best serving your clients, you're going to have put a lot of thought into what your online practice looks like. Because that's exactly what it is. When you go online, let's say you're working via a video platform, what that client's seeing is you in practice, in the same way as they would if they came to your room and sat opposite you. They would see you in your practice. And what does that look like? Does it reflect the same feeling, the same level of detail, the same level of care that a client would experience if they came to you in face-to-face setting? So it starts, online mindset starts with, before the client meets you, what do they see on your website? Do you have a special page dedicated to your online working, what that looks and feels like, what tools you use to protect the data, keep their data confidential? Do you have a different contract for working online? Do you have different protocols and procedures that you will follow when you're working online? And the answer to all of these questions is yes, 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 and yes. If you are an ethical practitioner and you've done training in online working, you will have covered all of those areas. But it's, I guess, realizing that we should think about them, which is the starting point. And you mentioned the pandemic, and it's some years back now, but it was a defining moment. And the truth is, what happened during the pandemic is many counsellors, therapists opened up their laptops or took their tablets or turned on their phones and then carried on doing what they might have been doing in a face-to-face setting, trying the best they could to help and support their clients. But we've moved past that now. There's been so much research and development in online working, and there's a whole new world that we can delve into. But it requires having the mindset that says, wait a minute, this is different. It's not just exactly the same, but with my laptop open.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think I'm going to pick up a very important point that you brought up at the top of this discussion, and that was during training. And I remember that exercise because I set it all those years ago, Ken. And one of the reasons it was set was to really get students at the time to really think about how they were going to set their room out and to use the power of the group to, if you like, input and critique and stress test the ideas. And I seem to remember it as a very rich conversation. And as you say, it came down to where the tissues were placed and where you're going to put the tissues and where the chairs should be and where the lights should be. It was very, very in depth. And I do wonder if therapists who transposed onto online working had the same kind of experience. Well, how many people would have tested it out with their peers? I know it's something we really encourage for those who do our online and telephone course to meet a peer and try it out. But if you think about it, you've got to sustain for at least an hour, a stable internet connection, good sound, good lighting, a non-distracting background. You've got to be able to hear the client. And all these things are very, very different to working in the room, which is, why we always say, try it out, stress test your setup with a peer, get some feedback. Because, there's a lot more, it's a lot more intricate than working in a room. You've got effectively two chairs, few tables, you've got your window, you've got your lighting, but this is a more technical environment. And I think you have to, if you want to do online work, you really do have to engage with the technology and understand its uses, its advantages, but also what to do if the technology, may not work too well. It's a completely different environment, and that forms part of the online mindset, that commitment to understanding how it works, the technology, and in fact, some of the psychological processes that go along with working online.
Yeah. And we've covered in previous episodes many elements of online working, and there are so many differences. And one of the interesting bits of feedback that we get every single time that we run our certificate in online and telephone counselling training course is, wow, I didn't know there was so much to know. And we often speak about that, you don't know what you don't know. And that's why we do continuing professional development. That's why we're called by our ethical bodies to do continuing professional development, so that we're always growing in our competence so that we can better serve our clients. Now, if you take a online and telephone counselling course, you're going to be taught about all of those elements. And you're going to go into what the contract can look like, how your referral book might work, and a whole load of different things that encompass the ethics of being an online therapist. However, what is not often covered is how to look and sound professional online. And it's just coincidental, Rory, that I've just finished making a little mini training course, about 90 minutes of CPD on how to look and sound professional online. We'll pop a link into the show notes of this episode if you're interested in having a look at that, because there is a thought that to look and sound professional online, that you have to run out and buy a whole lot of specialist equipment, that somebody who looks good in an online setting has obviously spent lots of money to do so. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, because we do put our podcast clips up to YouTube, you'll see Rory and I are in a pretty professional setup. We've got professional microphones, professional lighting, professional backgrounds. And the reason for that is because our job calls for it. Because we make a podcast, we deliver continuing professional development and specialist niche training through Counselling Tutor. That's our job, is working and delivering online. However, you can get a really good look working online without having to spend a fortune, just by knowing some techniques and using what you have. You can use a laptop. And I'm going to give just a number of really quick wins here. Quick win number one. Do not have a window behind you when you're counselling. Because what happens, Rory, when a window is behind you?
Well, what happens is that the camera will expose for the light on the window, and you'll become nothing more than a dark silhouette, a mysterious moving black blob moving across the screen, much to the consternation of your clients, I would imagine.
Very much so. Yet that you become what is called underexposed, and you don't need to understand the terms. It just means that you cannot be seen clearly. So what does that mean for therapeutic contact? If that client is sharing their information, the nuance within your facial expressions is so important. They need to see your eyes. They need to see how you react. It's part of the communication, specifically if you've chosen video as the platform that you're working on. So by putting having a window behind you, it puts you into darkness. Now, just by turning that setup around and facing the window, it will light you up and change that shot dramatically. And that's without spending a single penny. And the second quick win that I wanted to give you is, if you're using a laptop, put it on a pile of books rather than just on a desk in front of you. And the reason for that is you want to try and bring the camera of the laptop up to your eye level, so that when that client is looking at you, you're not looking down on them, which could feel like a power play position, and you're not looking up at them, which could, again, infer some form of power dynamic, that you are on the same level as them. So they're looking at their screen, so they see what your camera picks up. So you want your camera to be at your eye level, so that that client feels that you're looking at them on their level. And those are two just very, very tiny little changes that you can make without spending a dime, that will make a massive difference just in your setup. But in order to kind of consider these changes, we come back to what this topic is about. You have to have the online mindset, the mindset of, what can I do to better how I show up online? And I guess we could look at CPD on things like looking good on online. You know, it doesn't always, our CPD doesn't always have to be 100% related to counselling.
No, absolutely can. And, I think understanding how to set yourself up so that you look professional is really important. Even little things like, your background, what's on your background. Some rookie errors can be having a background where you've got all your family pictures up, which is lovely if it's your own home, but may not be appropriate if you're working online. I wouldn't personally have my family pictures up if I was using a therapy room. And, it has been a cause of complaint in the past from clients who are, having fertility treatment, that the therapist got a picture of their family up. That was a complaint many years ago that was upheld. So being thoughtful of the background, how you sound. Also, one of the things that we know is that, if the video is slightly ropey, people will stick with it. However, if the sound is very distorted, people will turn off. So those are important things. And you're absolutely right. CPD about this, a very important topic, is very relevant, Ken, and it's claimable. You could easily justify doing maybe a short course on, I don't know, how to set your computer up, how to get the sound correct, how to do lighting. You can set a course up, as you can if you're in private practice, claim back against your tax any expenses that you may incur in setting up online, such as maybe buying yourself a pair of headphones, maybe buying yourself some lights, maybe buying yourself another microphone. All these can be claimed back as legitimate expenses when working online.
100%. And it was from all the questions that I made that training, Rory, because it's asked, and we teach the online and telephone counselling course, and so many people would then afterwards start asking questions like, what kit should I use, and how do I get the best look? And that's why that was created. And you mentioned sound. I think that sound is so important. It really, really is. And again, why? Because the nuance of how we respond to a client verbally and on non-verbal communication is so important. I'm talking about where we might go, yes, little noises. Now, you will have heard those because I've got a microphone that's going to pick those up. But if you think of a microphone that is built into a laptop or a phone, they usually are the cheapest part of that equipment. when they're building a brand new laptop at Apple, I doubt that they sit around going, "Oh, let's get the best possible sound we can out of this microphone." They think, "What's the smallest microphone we can use?" It's usually one of the cheaper parts of the setup, and you can lose that real connection. And a simple way, a really low budget way of making that connection, you mentioned it, Rory, is by adding headphones to your setup. Now that says two things to me, wearing headphones. Number one, it says to the client confidentiality. It says to that client, only I can hear you because I've got headphones on right now, so your voice is coming directly to me and only to me. You might even say that in your free introductory 20-minute session. The reason I wear these headphones is so that only I hear what you're saying. You have 100% confidentiality. So it says confidentiality. Means you can hear them properly, so you're not struggling from the speaker sound that might come out of your laptop or your phone or your device that you might be using. But secondly, so many headphones that you can get these days, relatively cheap, have got a little built-in microphone, and when they're building those headphones with the microphones in, they are building them so that maybe people can use them for telephone calls or for presentations. So they're putting a little bit more effort into the quality of the mic that you might get. And there's some beautiful headphones and mic setups, wireless ones that you can connect with Bluetooth, or you can get ones that you can plug in, and they're not a bank breaker. And I think that that's part of the online mindset, is in the same way as you will spend or invest in your face-to-face practice of buying the right color cushions for your couch for the client to sit on. There is a small investment in online work, spending money to get the right equipment. You've already mentioned, Rory, a computer that's going to not conk out every 5 minutes and is fast enough, an internet connection that is going to be fast enough. And I think these are all things that fall under that, having the right mindset.
Absolutely right. And I'd just like to say, Ken, before Apple's legal department contacts us, that I am sure that they'll use the highest quality components in everything they make. I'll move on. It is. You're absolutely right, Ken, that, it's the projection of professionalism when you meet someone online. If you're using a pair of headphones, you've got a high quality microphone, you're well lit, you've got a very neutral background. It's going to instill confidence in the client. I think sometimes it's a forgotten component of therapy, an ingredient, if you like, is that when someone's paying to see you, they have to have confidence in your professionalism. Now, when you're meeting face to face, that is going to be how you act, how you engage with the client. But when you meet online, you've got that added layer of the technology you use, the sound, the lighting, the background. All these are speaking, I think, to client confidence. And if a client, comes online, sees someone who is got a professional setup, doesn't have to cost the earth, as you say. There's some little side tricks and tips and fixes you can do, very low cost, that make a big difference in how you're perceived online. I think that goes a long way to the curative factor of therapy, the fact that the client has confidence in you and your abilities online. And I think there's no better person, Ken, than you to talk about this. So I think it's a must-see, this little presentation. I certainly am going to be watching it with my notepad and pen and see if we can get any tips. Definitely.
I think that it's 90 minutes of CPD that will make the biggest impact in your online practice. Honestly, I do. And I've got a little byline on it. You're going to love this, Rory. It's called How to Look and Sound Professional in Your Online Practice. And then underneath it says, change how your clients see you.
Yes.
Oh, isn't that clever?
that is very clever, that.
Well, if you're interested in that little mini training course, just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab. It's episode 332, and we'll pop the link to that. It's relatively inexpensive. And it'll be in the show notes. But also, we're going to put a handout in the show notes, Developing an Online Mindset. It's a document that from the Counselling Tutor Certificate in Online and Telephone Counselling. And it's going to kind of walk you through a couple of areas that we've discussed today. One of those that you mentioned, Rory, really, really important is the background, not having identifiers in the background. Things that you might not think of, like you might have a sign of your faith in your background that is invisible to you because you see it all the time. I see it on the news when people are being interviewed and they haven't really thought about their background, and you can see their children and their family and identifiers of their faith, and that might not be the faith of the person you're speaking to. It might they might receive that in the wrong manner. When we're speaking about children, what happens if you're meeting with a client who may have suffered a loss within their life, and now there's this reminder? We've got to be really considerate, as we would be in our face-to-face room. And one thing which is a pet hate of mine, I don't like them at all, Rory. I know they're used, and I'm not knocking anybody who's using them, but I urge you to consider this from this point of view, and that is when you use a virtual background. The thing with a virtual background, and I know there's video platforms where you can select a beautiful seaside resort with the waves splashing in the background. For me, counselling is about authenticity, being true, being real. And as soon as you have a background that is not true, that is not real, that is digitally generated, I wonder, and this is just my thinking, it doesn't make it a universal truth, I wonder if that doesn't send a psychological message of incongruence, I guess. And the reason being, I mean, if those backgrounds really worked, I'd be okay with it. But how many times have you been on a meeting with someone that may have that kind of a background, and when they move or something, it starts glitching and you start seeing little holes and you get a bit of a glimpse through the background? And I wonder how that might be for a client, because thinking we don't see that. We're looking and concentrating on the client. We're not going to see the glitches in our background. So there are ways to create a simple background with what you already have. And if you're thinking, well, I don't really have any room in my home for this, you'd be surprised. And I cover it in the training of how you can use the smallest section. In fact, remember when you interviewed Tamara? She makes a living from online therapy. And at the time when you were speaking to her, she was meeting with you from a cupboard under the stairs. It
was a pantry.
It was a pantry.
Howell.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful person, and makes a living from online therapy, a really good living from online therapy. You don't need a studio. You can I've seen people use a corner of a bedroom where the bed is not even made up, but you can't see that. You can only see what is on the frame, and it looks professional. Anyway, online mindset, that is our ethical, sustainable practice today. Go and get the handout for that, counsellingtutor.com. Podcast tab, episode 332, and the link to that little mini CPD course will be there for you as well. And that takes us out of ethical, sustainable practice right into Practice Matters, where you interviewed Richard Miller, Rory, speaking about a topic that is really dear to my heart, and that's ethical use of AI in therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. I caught up with Richard, who is an AI ethicist, and this is what he had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice, that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee. Visit counsellingtutor.com.
Ethics should always be at the centre of practice in counselling and psychotherapy. An ethical dimension should inform every client encounter, intervention and professional decision. Ethics form the basis of responsibility and defensible decision making, providing a strong foundation if we're ever called to account for our practice by a professional body. Today I'm speaking with Richard Miller, counsellor, supervisor, trainer and AI ethicist. Together we will attempt to navigate the ethical complexities of using artificial intelligence in practice to ensure the best interests of those we serve. So Richard, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Rory.
So first of all, I guess, AI, everybody's talking about AI. It's on the news, the government are talking about it. But in reality, what type of AI apps or devices may practitioners be already using and not know?
Yeah, it's a really good point. That a lot of AI use is what seems to be fairly mundane now. So the most recognizable ones will be like smart speakers, where we can speak to it. It recognizes our voices and can, respond to commands. You might recognize media algorithms, which, like, if you're watching on a video streaming platform like Netflix or something, it will recommend, based on what you've watched before, recommend this. Social media uses this extensively as well. So based on what posts you might like on something, it will recommend other posts. So quite a lot of the in our free time, in our digital lives, is largely governed by AI algorithms, which we can't really see or understand how they work. But they generally expose us to lots of different ideas and lots of different content based on trying to maximize our engagement with it. So that's a very, very broad category of it. So when we're saying, like, well, how does this apply to counselors? Well, what type of content you might see if you look on YouTube or look for counselling videos may be heavily skewed based on what an AI algorithm is suggesting you should watch.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, so those people who may have Netflix are often offered up other films in the same genre, and the computer algorithm will work out what your type of film is. Say that you like spy documentaries or romantic films. You're more likely to be offered up those than other types of film, which probably explains why on a hot August day when the tarmac was boiling over and me and my wife were talking about Christmas trees in the car, I picked my phone up after the end of a long journey, and lo and behold, all the adverts were on the social media for Christmas trees. It's very invasive, and I think that it's useful to talk about listening devices, and I kind of think that links into professional use of AI. If you're sharing your information with a device, that information presumably is being stored somewhere.
Yes, presumably being stored somewhere is the key thing. So if we're thinking about confidentiality ethically, then we want to make sure that confidentiality is provable. So can you demonstrate that your client notes are locked in the cupboard? Can you demonstrate that they're on an encrypted hard drive on your laptop? Now, we feel that we're responsible and good practitioners if we're generally mindful of this. However, we have what I call kind of like, fairly major leaks in confidentiality. If you're carrying a smartphone around in your pocket, and I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, like literally that's what the technology does. If you have a speaker or a phone or something like this, then there's a good chance it's listening and recording into things. Now, if we have a smartphone and our client has a smartphone, they might think, well, it's okay, they've consented to having that information recorded because they brought it with us. But do they have informed consent to this? Like I said, as a culture, as a species, have we given consent to have our information used like this? Well, yes, because we all ticked the the T's and C's in the tiny little bits when we signed up for our Gmail account or something like that. But we actually want to work at a higher standard of confidentiality. We want to protect the stories of our clients. And it's really, really important that we have or seek informed consent over how we use technology, especially when it comes to AI. So I would already say that how data is captured and stored is questionable, as in it's not designed for the good of the client. It's designed for the good of the company that are trying to use that information to market well.
Yes.
So there isn't sufficient checks and balances on tech companies who have a very strong agenda to promote these things. I'm not saying that means that they're all automatically evil. A lot of the time they're just trying to help people feel entertained and getting the stuff that they like. But the key thing for me is that you don't have, there isn't clear enough or informed consent about this. We're just kind of fairly blindly walking into this new era without really knowing where our information is kept.
Yes. And I think if you are interested in, devices or technology in the therapy room, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, press the podcast tab, go to episode 284. We actually have an interview with Kath Nibbs on the dangers of technology in the counselling room. So with that said, why is it important to think ethically about AI? I think we've already started going down that road, but why is it important that we put ethics and AI together when we're thinking of the best interests of our clients?
So if psychotherapy is a fairly new field in the history of our species. We think about how it's generally progressed. It's been asking questions, coming up with philosophies, and then we've had kind of doing experiments, doing research, debating, coming up with ideas. And that's often been what's informed how we actually practice. That's the story of how we learn to do what we do. After November 2022, the technology industry has completely changed. And I would argue that now technology is actually a much bigger influence over how we practice, where we practice, and what client expectations are than our traditional resources of, well, it's this philosophy or this approach or this research which guides it. So we can't now extract AI from the world. We have to therefore be able to understand it properly to make sure that we're aware of how the technology influences our practice, our thinking, and our lives and the lives of our clients. Even if you don't like AI or don't agree with it, your clients will have it in their lives already. And it's as the public discourse about AI grows and more uses of it become more available. Then it's going to become much more of a kind of individual psychological arena of importance for our clients. But they're also going to be I would argue, substantial societal changes as a result of this. And if we as practitioners, we as counsellors want to have a say on this, we need to find our voice to articulate our idea of how ethics should, how we should live well as people, how we should respect trust, how we should help human agency in a world where we have technology which might be much more agentic than a human.
Yes. Yes, I think you made a very good point. AI is surrounding us. As I speak here in the studio, I have my notes in something called Grammarly, which I use all the time for checking my spellings because I'm dyslexic. I don't think that's news to anybody who's followed the podcast for a time. Interestingly enough, I would never, ever put in personal details of anybody into that particular app or any other app. Having spoken to a friend of mine who's a solicitor who is banned from using it to write legal documents. I had lunch with my friend who's a solicitor, and he said we're not allowed to use it. His view, I'm not saying that that's the actuality, but that was his view. So again, it's about being thoughtful. And I guess with the rise of this new industrial revolution, which is what it is, artificial intelligence is going to change the way that we work and change our jobs. And, some people sadly I think will lose their jobs because of AI. Professional bodies such as BACP, UKCP, NCPS, to name just three of, I think, the 13 professional bodies that sit under the Professional Standards Authority umbrella, are very, very keen to develop policies around the ethical use of AI. And full transparency, Richard and myself actually sit on a expert reference group for AI, and are both of us are contributing, and indeed my colleague Ken Kelly is contributing with others to developing outward-facing policies for the use of AI. So I think it might be useful now to just think about how are professional bodies engaging with this, Richard?
Sure. Yeah. So it's always good to remember that these professional bodies or membership bodies, that the individual members have a lot of influence over what then happens and how the policy comes out, especially if we kind of, work collectively on this. But this may be good to see, just to contrast this against how do professional bodies generally develop ethics policies anyway. Well, they do public consultations, they'll look at research studies, they'll look for evidence and then decide from there, okay, right, this is clearly best practice now. They do this very carefully, or at least they ought to, and I think they generally aspire to do this as well as they can, with the view of trying to protect clients and trying to make sure that the profession's integrity is protected. What's different in the era of AI is that because the technology is advancing so quickly, that if we were to say, well, let's just wait 3 or 4 years and see what happens, then the whole world's changed and we don't have any policies in place, if that makes sense. So we're in a time where it's problematic for policymakers to actually come up with ideas about what to do if they are reliant on the tradition of let's wait for published evidence to tell us, to help guide us. So what we have to do, I would argue, and professional bodies have to do, is really come back to the core of critical thinking and ethical thinking. We need to be able to use our combination of good reasoning and intuition to be able to make rough guesses over how the technology is going to actually roll out in counselling rooms, and to then look at kind of common sense things to do to make sure that the trust in the profession, and importantly the human connection, is protected from a technology that might diminish it in ways that are not obvious. That's the other thing that's important too. It's nice if there's straightforward and clear do's and don'ts. And those will probably be the things that everyone would say first. For example, I'm happy to go on record here and say, if you're a counsellor, do not use AI to generate pornographic images of your clients. That is wrong. As in another way of putting this is, something that you do online that's unethical is likely to be unethical in person as well. So a lot of what's wrong is common sense. But with AI, because the technology sometimes is very nuanced, we have to increase our awareness of the situation to actually come up with useful policy that doesn't just appear to protect client confidentiality, but actually protects it, is a part of the challenge. And I think at the moment what we're doing is having different conversations. There's different professional bodies discussing this, trying to catch up and increase our understanding of the technology, and I'm really glad that they are. I mean, I was losing sleep over this until Susan Dale from BACP said, "Oh, we're looking for somebody who's knows about AI." I was like, "Oh, thank goodness they're taking this seriously." The fact that this cross body that Rory and I have met is even there, I think, is wonderful. So we are playing catch up with the technology, and as a species we will be forever playing catch up with AI, but the policies and the good decisions that we can make now will have a big impact in how we actually practice in years to come. Yeah. And also what our sense of what's clearly good and clearly bad will need to be developed.
Yes, I mean, I think it's interesting in the current BACP ethical framework, it says that the client therapists mustn't have sexual relationships with their clients, which I thought was a quite striking thing to put in, because I thought that would be something that everybody knew. But apparently that wasn't the case. They've had to put it in. And I guess that there will be some we must do's, we should do's in ethical frameworks. And I think it is a bit of a challenge, as I outlined. I'm using an app to help with my dyslexia today to put the show notes in, which is AI driven, and we're engaging with it all the time. So what in your view are the key challenges that practitioners face in this new world of artificial intelligence?
There's just like you're saying with Grammarly, a lot of the challenges that I think counsellors will face will be about trying to think clearly about trade-offs between ethics and utility, or ethics and helpful functions. So you could have an AI supervisor, you could have an AI client that you practice with, you could have an AI note writing system, you could have an AI everything. I sat down and thought through like hundreds of different examples of how AI could be used, some of which some individuals will find really helpful, and some people will think, well, I don't really need to do that. For an individual practitioner going into a world where there's going to be so many AI apps out there, like because the AI can write their own apps now, so there's going to be so many kind of like different software infrastructures, that what the kind of practitioner challenges will often be is, how can I demonstrate that using this is ethical? How can I prove it to myself? How can I be comfortable? If you think of it a little bit like a car, it's like, this car is great. It can get me to work, and get me to the hospital, it can help me get my shopping, do all these great things, but it can also run people over. Are there things that I can do to keep it safe? So we need to, I think a big part of the challenge is counselors need to really look at what their trade-offs are. It's like, am I willing to use this technology, and how much is this potentially going to risk confidentiality or trust? How much of this might influence my ability to think clearly myself, or am I just going to trust what this AI says? Because the AIs sound and are very, very intelligent. If you've got a really, really smart neighbor who knows everything, eventually you keep going and asking them questions. It's like, right, well, what do I do with this? We have to kind of learn to keep our ability to think critically protected. And so I think a big part of the challenge will be one, being knowledgeable about what the individual applications of AI are, but also being aware of the challenges of how this actually plays out in our clients' lives, and being aware of of how that technology shapes our lived experience. And if we get put off by, oh, this technology sounds scary, then we're potentially missing out on understanding how the world is going to be now. So I would say to people, if you're scared of the technology, you're not wrong for being scared about it, but try and be courageous and find out more about it. Try and increase your level of understanding about it. And in practice, I think you'll see people getting disciplinary problems for breaching confidentiality or inappropriate use of it in the first in the early years, while people are kind of clumsily using the technology, like, oh, just ask ChatGPT in the room what to do, kind of stuff. And it's well intended, but actually, if you haven't got consent from the client and you don't know what you're doing, you don't have insurance for it, then you can get in a lot of trouble for that. It's like saying that you're trained in something or able to do something that you are not is dishonest. So it's important that people find a kind of balance there. But I think there are many, many more challenges that we wouldn't have time to cover here today. But from the main kind of challenges, I think, will be people choosing between kind of function and client safety, essentially.
Yes, and there is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes,
which is a form of cognitive bias, where I won't go too deeply into Dunning-Kruger, but I'm sure people will be Googling it after the podcast. But it's where people overestimate their abilities, and sometimes don't trust in what they're seeing, as opposed to taking a wider view. A good example of that would be, a few years ago, I read a report of a pilot who was flying across water. He was a commercial pilot, and they thought they were at 30,000 feet, because that's what the instruments told them. It was quite a bad day, and actually they were 2,000 feet off the water, and the passengers could see through the breaks in the cloud the water very close, and were telling the stewards and stewardesses to tell the pilot they thought they were too close. The pilot's reaction was, "Oh no, we're at 30,000 feet. The instruments tell us that." And the fact of the matter is that someone had taped over the air pressure sensor on the aeroplane to clean it, hadn't took it off. So that the instruments were giving them the wrong information, and overestimating your abilities because you're only getting information from one part can be quite dangerous. And I think you're right. I think that a lot of people will get into difficulties. A lot of practitioners will get into difficulties because they do well-intentioned things without understanding the unintended consequences of that. A good example is, saying to clients, if you say you're having a break, everybody needs a holiday, right? Every therapist needs some time off. A client may say, well, what am I going to do to support myself? Oh, well, I'll give you a chatbot you could use. And the chatbot is a psychoanalytical chatbot. and you're a person-centered therapist, that could lead people into difficulty. And, and also, he's a robot. I mean, it might sound like a human, it might pass the Turing test of sounding like a human, but ultimately it is a machine. And we need to be thoughtful of that. So, Dunning-Kruger effect. We see it played out so often, don't we?
There's quite a few different cognitive biases, which I think are generally good for people to be aware of. Dunning-Kruger is certainly a big one. But like the example you give there is a really important one, because I think that's exactly the type of situation. You go away on holiday and you feel guilty, I'm leaving my clients behind. So you could give them a chatbot, but actually, if you've got a little bit of technological confidence, you could have an AI avatar version of you, which looks and sounds like you, that they can chat to online when you're not there. So if we're thinking about the ethics of this, like, okay, one, does the client know that they're chatting to a chatbot? Do they think they're chatting to a real person? Do I read the conversations that the client has with them in between the sessions? How do I use that information? How is that chat information stored? Where is it stored? Does the client have the right to delete it later? There's a whole bunch of different ethical questions that comes out from something that just seems like a handy thing to do. So we need to really remember, in using this technology, that it is designed to be super convenient and easy to use, because the AI companies want to train their models on everything you can give them. So it's meant to be really easy to use. We should be treating it with much more caution. We should see it as being more powerful and a little bit more dangerous than it's made out to be, and therefore act appropriately. We should be thinking this is a car that can go really, really fast, and I can crash it if I don't have sufficient, if I'm not thinking clearly about how to keep it safe.
Yes. Yeah. I think that those are wise words. And I think that if there's anybody listening saying, well, I'm not going to get involved in this AI business, it's not for me, I'm afraid that you are going to get involved in the AI business, because people are going to come in and talk about it.
Yeah,
sure. Like effectively, like when I was a child therapist, and I asked my daughter what kind of things the young people talk about, and it was social media. And I took on a load of social media training, and the first question I got from my young client when I first went into practice was, "Do you know about Facebook? Do you know about the inbox, which now we would call Messenger?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And that was the form of the client checking me out to make sure that I understood their world. And I think possibly that will happen with AI. So you've really outlined a lot of interesting things in terms of us engaging with artificial intelligence. So where does that leave your role in shaping the direction of AI and ethics? What are you doing? Where are you at the moment?
I mean, like I said, I spent a long time literally having troubled night sleeps, thinking about this all the time, wondering like, okay, this is happening. I literally remember this like a massive stone dropping in my stomach when ChatGPT first came out, and I was like, "Oh, this is really gonna change everything." And since then, the question that I've been trying to answer myself is, what can we as counsellors do to be prepared for this? And what do we do to increase our awareness of the situation? So what I'm doing is I'm looking for ways to try and get the information out there to people, to try and encourage people to think ethically and to basically not overly trust the technology until they've learned a sufficient level of skepticism of it, and to try and make sure that ultimately our clients and our profession is protected. So I'm doing that through a combination of like training. I did a really substantial industry-wide risk assessment, which is kind of given lots of different examples of different scenarios and what to do. And I suppose at some point I'll be hoping to offer maybe some more training on this. But to scale this up, we maybe need a few more hands on deck rather than just this Richard Miller guy talking about AI. Like I actually think we need more infrastructure from a policy level and from a practice level, and on the training courses. I think counsellors coming out of courses now, if they're not getting any training on how to use AI, I don't think their trainers are being responsible. I think people need to have a training to understand how they're practicing well. And if you like, and as you mentioned, people are like, well, it's not going to really affect me. It's like, I appreciate that. And actually, if you strongly believe that it's wrong and you don't want to use it, then I commend you for that. But we still have to be aware of it. We still have to understand how it works and how it shapes our thinking and our clients' thinking.
Absolutely. And of course, obviously, this is a discussion to have in supervision.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, so that's the first thing that I did was do a presentation at supervisors conference. So I was saying, like, if your supervisee comes up to you and says, I'm using this AI thing, and the supervisor goes, oh, that's cool, I've seen that, my neighbor used that to make poetry. Like when we're completely missing an understanding of how the confidentiality issues are addressed there. So in practice, what the main thing I want to get across to supervisors is, if you're using an AI tool, conduct a risk assessment. And not just an AI general risk assessment, do a specific risk assessment of how that is being used with the client. Think it through. What might you need to do if you can't use the AI anymore? What would you do if it goes wrong? Can the client complain against it or have a right to refuse against it being used? Have you thought through that? Have they given an informed consent? These things are so important to get right, and supervisors need to have that knowledge right in their heart to be able to feel confident enough to say, hey, are you using AI? And if so, can we talk about how you're using it safely?
Yeah, and I'm sure this is a conversation.
People talking about it.
I'm sure this is a conversation you've had with your supervisor.
Yes, indeed I have. Yes, indeed I have. The mighty Bridie McKenzie, who's been a wonderful influence in helping me have the confidence to actually come out and talk about this as well. So big thanks to you, Bridie. And yes, so we've been speaking about AI for many years, and looking at the generative effects of it, like it can make presentations, or it can make blog posts or write stuff. There's all this really exciting things that it can do. But we really need to think through the consequences of things and not get carried away with the buzz of it. We need to actually make sure we're kind of following our own values on this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, hello to Bridie. I know that you're a listener of the podcast, so hello to you. If you want any more information on ethical use of AI, or if you want to make contact with Richard, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, click episode 332, we will put Richard's details on there, and we will update them if he's doing any other interesting things like providing training or any links to documents. So just keep going back to episode 332, counsellingtutor.com, hit the podcast tab, episode 332. It just goes for me to say, Richard Miller, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I hope your listeners have found this interesting, and feel welcome to contact me if there's anything you think I'm wrong about. Please do correct me.
Massive thank you to Richard Miller. Thank you to you, Rory, for holding the all-important discussions. I think whichever way you look at this, we have to look at it with an open mind as counsellors and psychotherapists. I know there's mixed views out there, and I see them in the groups with people going, that there's no way I would even look at AI. AI is to be avoided at all costs. It's a sad day when AI enters therapy. But then I look at other posts, and I look at documents that are sitting with the government at the moment, where they're considering AI-based tools for therapists to help us, deliver a better service. And whichever way you look at this, it is coming. It's like a wave that is coming, and we need to embrace it at least at some level. And there's a great saying that says, AI will not take your job. But I tell you what will. Another person who knows how to use the AI tools to streamline their job and make them more efficient. And I think that this means we just need an open mind. We spoke in the beginning about that online mindset. I think we need a AI mindset as well, an open mind to embracing AI, but ensuring that we do so ethically. What a great, great topic. And I'm really grateful, Rory, for you holding that. So there it is. That was Practice Matters. We now move into student services, where we recognize you, students, on your formal journey to be a counsellor or a psychotherapist. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting. And it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counsellingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, why are students asked to compare ethical frameworks? This is one of the assignments, certainly here in the United Kingdom. You're told, take an ethical framework of a counselling organisation and compare it and contrast it to other frameworks, maybe outside of counselling. Why, Rory?
It's a very good question. It's one that came up in our Facebook page only this week. So if you not a member of our Facebook page, Facebook, Counselling Tutor, click on the Join tab and we'll see you there. And it is one that comes up every single year because I think it's one particular awarding body, I think it's SEG, asked for this to be done. And it's done for a very good reason. And that's because when we train therapists, certainly at practice level, so diploma and above, we're always driving in, as we said at the top of the podcast, the ethical framework, work ethically. And what can happen is that students leave our kind of teaching practice, graduate, and only think there's one code of ethics, and that code of ethics is the only one and must be obeyed at all times. And that's not a bad position to have. However, you may work in a multidisciplinary area where you're asked to abide by another code of practice. And I'll give you an example of that. So if you work, for instance, in a drugs rehabilitation centre and you're providing therapy, one of the things you might have in your contract, and this is key to this, is that if someone declares that they're using street drugs as well as medication to come off drugs, you'll have to break confidentiality. And there's a really good reason for that. That is, if someone is on, say, a prescription for, say, methadone or another medication that helps with withdrawal from drug use, and they're topping up with street drugs, they may very well become unwell and could possibly die. So it would be in the best interests of that client for that to be declared. Now, that doesn't appear in any ethical framework as far as I know. That means you're working to another code of practice and you have to adjust the contract that the client agrees with to fit that in. Another one is very little known, that if you're a doctor in the UK and someone comes and wants to be treated for a knife wound or a gunshot wound, from what I've read, a doctor is under an ethical obligation to report it to the police. That's not the case if it's a therapist. I mean, I doubt if many therapists had worked with someone who'd been shot. It's very possible, I suppose, or a knife wound, more probable. But it just goes to prove that when you're working in different environments and organisations, that you have to work with two codes of practice. And the way you do that is that you look at one code of practice and another code of practice, and then you delineate that into the contract. And at that point, the client can make an informed choice whether they want to proceed. Good example is working in a drugs rehabilitation centre. So it really is, I think the reason that students are asked to compare and contrast is because they'll probably, almost certainly, be asked to work in a multidisciplinary environment, Ken.
Definitely. Beautiful explanation of that, Rory. It really is.
Oh, thank you very
nice
much.
And in depth with examples. It all makes 100% sense. And just to echo what you've said, that multidisciplinary working, it kind of prepares you. The thing is, when you become a counsellor, you are a professional. You're in a way, you're a clinician of sorts, and you will be working dependent on where you end up expressing your practice, you'll be working with other professionals. And it's interesting to understand how other professionals work, and to what they work. One is social workers. They will have their ethical code of practice that they work to. And I think that the other side of this is, so the one is to be seen as a fellow professional and to recognize other fellow professionals and take the time to maybe understand. If I was going into a situation where in my practice I was going to be working regularly with referrals from social work team, I would be interested to look at their code of practice to understand how they work and what their framework looks like, so that I can speak their language, because it's common courtesy. The other side of this is, when you're studying the ethical framework, it may be the first time that you're coming across working within an ethical framework. And what they're trying to show you is what an ethical framework actually is and what it draws on to be the document that it is. And when you compare it with a different profession, like social work, I'm just going to use as an example here, you're going to see that it draws on different things, and some of them might be the same. And that's what you're asked for in that analysis. When you're looking at it, they're going to say what's the same. They're going to say what is different, so that you can see that and understand that I think that by comparing a counselling ethical framework with that of nursing or that of social work, it gives you a more of an understanding of what makes up an ethical framework in general and what is specific for counselling and psychotherapy. And as you said, Rory, it's vital to know if you are working within an organization where you may be expected to operate under a different ethical framework, that you will understand what that might look like. And I worked in medical centers for some time, in doctors' surgeries, and there was a lot of processes, procedures, and ways of working within the practice that was linked into their ethical framework that I needed to learn and understand. And they were different to my counselling ethical framework. And because I'd been through the lesson of learning to look and compare and contrast other ethical frameworks, I wasn't threatened by that. I didn't go in and say, no, but this is my ethical framework and this is what I work to. I was malleable in going, okay, I can see where the similarities and differences lie. Here's where my hard stops are on client confidentiality. But outside of that, of course, I'm happy to work under different guidelines and different ways of working.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think one of the biggest differences between counselling frameworks and other codes of practice is that, generally speaking, it's a generalisation but pretty accurate, is that we're accountable to the client, not for the client. So, if you're a doctor or a nurse, you're accountable for the client. In other words, you're actively engaged in the client care. That might be the drugs or the prescriptions you write or the interventions you use. Same if you're working with children, you are, people who work in child protection are subject for the client. In other words, they have certain responsibilities and certain actions to take if a child is under any sort of threat or danger. With a therapist, we are only responsible to the client. And so it's really important that if we're working in multidisciplinary teams, in particular, I think when you're working with children, that you understand that there are some cases where you may be responsible for the client. And one of those that I came across as a child therapist was if a child was in any danger, where maybe with an adult client we wouldn't have put too much focus on it. If someone said, well, I might be going out tonight and I might get into a fight, would you break confidentiality for that? Probably not, if they were an adult. But if that was a child that said that to you, then you would probably have to take a different view. So that's why it's so important to understand what other frameworks ask, not only of the therapist, of yourself, but also of your colleagues, because it's in respect of your colleagues, because they're going to be working if they're not working in your discipline, they are going to be working to their own framework. So you're absolutely right, Ken. Look at it, work out your hard stops, communicate with your colleagues. So important.
Yes. I'm going to kind of maybe end this with a few examples. So one example, I'm going now to the time I was working within the doctor's surgery. It was a multidisciplinary team that was working within there, including mental health services that were coming in, and I would receive referrals from inside the practice. Within the practice, there was a practice confidentiality, which kind of covered anything that happened within the practice was kept confidential. Why? Well, because we had to share certain details so that clients were not having to repeat themselves again and again and again. If you go to your GP and you say, this is what's going on for me and I'm really struggling with this, that, and the next thing, and the GP says, I'm referring you to the counsellor, and they get to the counsellor and the counsellor says, well, what are you here for? And you have to start again, you're going to feel that you're not seen or heard. And that is common in a service user's journey. Where when they kind of feedback, they say, every single time I get to another professional, I have to start again and tell my whole story again. So there was information sharing within the practice that may not have happened outside if it was just a counselling practice. And then another area was when I was asked for the feedback of what was covered in the counselling sessions and to give a report back, I asked why that was necessary. They said that the information that was given to me from the practice lead was, well, if the doctor is referring somebody to you for counselling, they want to know what kind of an outcome that person got. And I thought about this, and I thought about our confidentiality as counsellors, and that a client may very well share with me something that they wouldn't want to share with their doctor. And I asked, would it be okay if the doctor asked the client themselves how they were finding the counselling? And because they understood that I worked to an ethical framework of confidentiality, they understood that. And they said, oh, of course, yes, that makes 100% sense. And it put me into a situation where I didn't have to cover any in-depth details in my notes, just that the person had arrived and the assessments the tools that we were using were filled in on those, and that if any further information was needed, that the team could ask that person themselves, and they could then share how it was for them. I think it's a good topic to cover, and hopefully we've answered the question of why it is covered in counselling training and why it's important, because that's the question we see, isn't it, Rory? People asking, why do I have to do this?
What's the point of this activity? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, there's method behind the madness in counselling training. There really is. Sometimes it seems why, but they're all there for a reason. And that is our student services, where we covered why our student asked to compare ethical frameworks. And this, of course, has been episode 332 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with ethical sustainable practice, and we did a deep dive into online mindset, developing attitudes and a little bit of technical skill to be able to work efficiently and ethically online with your clients. On to Practice Matters, an interview with Richard Miller, ethical use of AI in therapy, a hot topic in therapeutic circles, and one that's being discussed in many areas of our therapeutic lives and indeed world. And then finally, on to student services, why are students asked to compare ethical frameworks? Ken and myself had a little trip down the avenue of multidisciplinary teams and being able to work within a 2 or maybe 3 codes of practice. And finally, we'd like to thank you for your support. Your subscriptions, your shares, and your likes means the world to us. So until next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource.
Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.